Thank you so much, Allison, and welcome everybody. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you to Delta Omega for the invitation. So my name again is Dr. Marissa Robinson. I serve as an adjunct professor at the Milken Institute School of Public Health at George Washington University in Washington, D.C. So before we jump into the content, I would love for us to do our sheep scale. So sheep scale is something that I saw very early on in my career as a way to engage an audience, especially virtually. And so because we're talking about communication today, I think this is going to be a great way to kick us off. So if you are able to utilize your keyboard, if you can put a number in the chat of how are you feeling this morning. It's a Monday, there's a lot of snow. I'm here on the East Coast, so we just got snow and ice last night. So we got 9 threes, 1s, a 6, a 2, a 5, a 3, a 9, a 7, 4. Awesome, awesome. So continue to keep putting those numbers in the chat, guys. Those numbers in the chat. If you're just joining, welcome, welcome. All right, so we got some 2s, we got some 3s, we got some all the ways 1 through 9s, right? So everybody is showing up as a different sheep today, but hopefully by the time we get to the end of the presentations today, that you will be feeling motivated and feeling a little bit better than the number you might have put on your screen. Thank you so much for participating. So really quick, I would like to also do a poll just to see how folks feel coming into this webinar, because it's really important to do some grounding to just see where everybody is. So my question for you all is, do you feel confident explaining public health information to someone outside of your field? So you can share in the chat if you feel confident. You can put a yes. If you're kind of like, I don't know, maybe, go ahead and put your responses in the chat. And if no, if you're not comfortable explaining, what are your biggest challenges? Reasonably confident but room for improvement. Love that. Sometimes depending on the topic. Absolutely. Yes. Perfect. Maybe. Got it. Okay. So we have some folks who are in the middle. We have some folks who are confident. We have some folks who want to learn. And it all depends on the context. Absolutely. So again, today is really about being an effective communicator, right? And so to be able to communicate effectively, we have to know who our audience is, what is our message, and where are we going. So thank you all for participating in that. Okay. So it's no surprise that communication shapes our trust, right? And so we know that communication is an influence and is a tool. It's not just a skill. So as you are, some of you may be in undergrad, some of you may be new graduates from a master's program. Maybe some of you are going into a doctoral program. Some of you may be in the earlier parts of your career with your first job, and some of you are maybe job searching. Everybody on this webinar is in different places and spaces in life. And maybe some of you are not early career. Maybe you are seasoned or mid-career level and you just came to learn. So ultimately, I am a lifetime learner, and I love when other people are lifetime learners, because it's so important that we always try to learn and be sponges, right? We don't know everything, and that humility is really important when you're trying to be an effective communicator. And so another thing I want to be very clear about is when we're linking data, we want to be sure that we're resonating with the community or whoever our audience is. So how many of you have had to translate data into maybe a policy brief or a paper, or have had to take a data set and either analyze it and do some sort of writing or presentation or something like that? Anybody? You can write in the chat if you have. Yes, perfect. Okay, great, great. So this is something that you all are familiar with. Wonderful, exactly. So if you've had to translate data into a writing or an infographic, let's say, we have to think about who our audience is, right? Some of our audiences are going to be other academics. So maybe we can use acronyms, we can use academic jargon, but if it's going to, let's say, a publicly available website, we're going to change that language up a bit, right? We're not going to use that same nomenclature, and we're going to try to understand, okay, maybe I'm going to use a 3rd grade reading level for some of my information. Or maybe I'm going to make sure that somebody from the audience that I'm trying to push this information out to is at the table with me to describe what would be best and what are kind of those key takeaways that I can share with my wider audience. So again, we want to tailor our messages depending on who our audience is, and sometimes we have to change that up depending on where it is and who is this information best for. And lastly, but certainly not least, every single day we have to communicate, right? You may be communicating to a family member, communicating to a partner, communicating to a pet or a loved one or a child. And so these are the things that we are doing on a daily basis. And sometimes we forget that we're communicating, and we forget that we're doing something public health related. How many times do people put on a seatbelt every day? Public health. How many times do we wash our hands or brush our teeth? Public health. So sometimes we're communicating public health daily and we don't even realize it because we are all in the public health field, right? But for some of us who aren't in the public health field, we sometimes need those reminders of how we are able to incorporate public health into our life each and every day. So we're going to keep going. And feel free, we're going to stop after my presentation to do a brief Q&A. So please, there's a Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. If you have any questions, please go ahead and put those in the chat. And if not, that's totally fine. But there's a Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. All right, so translating complex data into messages that resonate. So as we're going through the different realms of public health, it's so important to know our audience, okay? So this is before we're crafting the message. So you shouldn't be figuring out your audience after you've put out a message unless you're doing message testing. Has anyone done message testing before? You can write yes or no in the chat. But message testing is literally putting a message out there and trying to figure out, okay, is this resonating with people? Is this something that is good? Is this bad? So message testing is something that we put out in the community before we know the audience that we're trying to find. And that is curating you to find what best audience would fit that message. All right. So that is the only time you would not know your audience before you craft your message. So if we're thinking about public health initiatives, if we're thinking about grant opportunities, a lot of times that population or that audience that we're thinking about is already captured. So we maybe are thinking about a geographic demographic. Maybe we're thinking about a certain age range. Maybe we're thinking about a certain socioeconomic status. Maybe we're thinking about those who are younger versus older, et cetera, right? And so again, we want to make sure that we identify the audience before. So that's step one. Step two, I just talked about this on the last slide, but removing jargon without removing accuracy. So again, thinking about bullet points. As you see on my slide, we have a picture, we have a title, and we have 4 bullet points. I think in presentations in public health, has anyone ever seen a bad presenter and a bad presentation? Maybe too many words on the slide, or maybe too much going on. Anybody seen a bad presenter or seen a bad slide deck before? Yes. Okay. Yes. And maybe you haven't, but you will in your lifetime see a bad a bad presenter or a bad presentation. Yes. And so again, we want to think about the visual learners, but we also need to think about auditory learners, people that hear and can listen better than they can visually see, thinking about those who are maybe visually impaired or those living with accessibility. You know, we want to make sure it's accessible to all. So we need to think about not just the visual learners, but also the auditory learners, thinking about those that don't want to digest it right then and there. Maybe they need to digest it, process it, and come back to it. So we need to have things like recordings available. We need to have the slides available, those sorts of things. So jargon and sometimes the excess things aren't just the words, okay? So thinking about illustrations, thinking about infographics, thinking about tables, charts, making sure things are well labeled, thinking about the color schemes. All of those things are super important when curating a message. Next thing, leading with why it matters first rather than the data first. Have you ever seen, a bad commercial where you're hearing about all the pharmaceutical side effects of what's going on with the drug? They talk about what it's treating first, right? They don't get to all the side effects and all the things first. So again, it's important to capture your audience of why it matters. This is solving pancreatic cancer. This is slowing down dementia. This is going to decrease asthma rates. Those are things that the community and your audience would want to hear first, rather than, oh, these are all the side effects and all the negative things, right? But that's really important because ethically, we want to still include why these drugs or why this initiative or program is important and why it matters, but also what is making it, negative in a community, what is going to make a positive impact. We need to be well-rounded in our messaging. And lastly, real world implications. So having somebody with lived experience at the center of your message, so paramount and critical. We want to encourage our audience members whenever we're thinking about any sort of communication in public health of who is this for and what do they need. So normally when you're doing maybe a focus group or you're trying to curate some sort of initiative, you want the person closest to the problem that you're trying to solve at the table with you as you're developing something, not afterwards and thinking that it's going to solve the problem that you're trying to address. All right. So make sure those 4 things that you're thinking about. So we're thinking about knowing our audience before we put the message out there, removing the jargon, making things accessible, leading with why it matters to the community before we think about sharing the data. And then lastly, what are some real world implications or life anecdotal stories that we can attach to it to make it real for people? All right, we're going to keep going. And again, if you're just joining, welcome. Please, if you have any questions, feel free to put it in the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. So, second to last, I wanted to talk about adapting your communication. So I talked about this a little briefly at the beginning, but again, I really want to underscore that your communication and how you're tailoring your message should be different based on who your audience is and where is this information going. Is it going in short form? So we're thinking TikTok, we're thinking social media, or is it going on the radio? It still needs to be short, but it's only for auditory. So we don't want a lot of noise. We want straight facts. We want a catch, and we want it soon, and we want it to make sense. But if it's a policy environment, a political environment, we need to add the data right at the beginning, as soon as we say why this matters, giving those statistics, right? Yes, it's possible to get the slides after this recording. We'll share it with the Delta Omega team and you all will receive a copy. And this will also be available on their YouTube page as well. So going back to the different types of media, there's a lot of different media sources out there. You're so welcome. There's a lot of different media sources out there, right? And there's podcasts, there's radio, there's TV, there's written communication, right? We have a lot of peer-reviewed journals, we have magazines, we have all sorts of different media types and communications that you can put public health information out there. But again, going back to the earlier slide, we got to know our audience, right? So if we're trying to reach young people, where are the young people at? They're not in the peer-reviewed journals, right? They're not subscribed to those things. Sometimes they are. But for the most part, if we're trying to reach young people, we're going to take it to the digital media. Insta, TikTok, exactly. How many of y'all have heard of Substack? Substack, Reddit, that's where a lot of people go. All different age ranges, right? So if we're trying to reach a certain population, we have to also do our research before we curate the message. And so the research also is thinking about who is going to benefit from this and where do they receive their information the most. How many of you all have heard of something called impressions? Anybody heard of impressions? So impressions is something that you receive once you are, if you have a business page or you have a post and you're looking at analytics. How many of you are familiar with analytics on social media platforms, for example? The impressions that you get are how many times that people interact with your post, how many people click, how many people scroll, how many people read. Exactly. So yes, impressions are very important to realize what your reach is. You might only get maybe, let's say 50 or 25 likes or 100 likes. But if you get 20,000 impressions, right? That means it reached a lot of people, but maybe they didn't engage with it. Okay, why do you think people didn't engage? Was the information too, yes, the Insight dashboard, exactly. But maybe the information was too dense. Maybe it wasn't short enough. Maybe I didn't get the hook right. So you need to think about your hook and what is going to bring people to your content before you think about spitting off the data. Sometimes I like to really grab people with a really jarring statistic, and that's what keeps people engaged. You have to engage your audience within 1 to 3 seconds when you're talking about digital media. So you have to have a hook, you have to have something in there that's going to keep their attention, and then you want to keep it throughout the video or whatever your post is, whether it's text or a video. And so again, thinking about being clear, being confident, and then also what at the end are you trying to prove? Is it a call to action? Is it a policy? Is it a actual action that you want them to do, like a follow, or you want them to like, subscribe? That's why you hear I know many of you maybe are familiar with YouTubers, right? At the end, they're like, comment, like, subscribe, hit that notification bell. Those are the analytics that they're trying to grab from their audience members. And so that's why a lot of people on social media want you to interact with their posts, because that's how the media platforms can show engagement. And engagement, impressions, and messaging all kind of work hand in hand. And this is just from a digital space, but this is also goes the same for, written media. How many people are subscribed to, maybe you have a blog post, maybe you have a Substack. How many people are going through and liking or commenting on your Reddit posts or on, the platforms that you use? So thinking about this from a larger picture, you should think about all of these different adaptations, because again, being solution focused is great, but if it doesn't connect with your audience, you're not going to get the impression that you're looking for. And so sometimes looking at your analytics and message testing to put something out there and see what you get back, and engaging with your audience to say, hey, I'm working on something. Can you give me feedback? That's qualitative research right there, right? So sometimes we think very abstractly about public health and think it needs to be this big, jarring thing, but it really doesn't, because at the end of the day, public health, it matters to everybody, even though sometimes people don't see it. And it's our duty as public health practitioners to bring that to life and remind people of that. Okay? So my last slide is looking at inspiring action. Okay? And look, now I have a different media source, right? We have a GIF. How many of you use GIFs? I love GIFs. I send them all the time to my friends in group chats. I post them online, sometimes different memes and things like that. So is anybody familiar with GIFs? Am I the only one that uses GIFs? Is GIFs old? Hold on. This is important. Hold on. Am I a dinosaur now? Okay. Love GIFs. All right. Just making sure y'all are still with me. No, they are not old. Okay, good. I just had to tap in, okay? All right, good. Totally use them. Great. Okay, I'm not alone. I'm glad my GIF people are out there. But if you have never used a GIF, I highly encourage you to use a GIF, because sometimes a meme that's just a picture isn't going to get you there. Sometimes you need that video with a little caption. And again, this is another great tool to utilize, maybe a reaction or how you're feeling, that can really resonate with your audience way more than just a picture or just a video. Okay. And so thinking about some takeaways from just what I've shared, because again, it's 30 minutes is not a lot of time to go through communication. And again, if you want to be brief, you got to be concise and you got to get to the point. So if you've learned nothing from today, I think it's about balancing. How do you take your message, know your audience beforehand, but be able to effectively communicate something and give them a call to action at the end? You will have the methodology to put together a good communication tool to get your audience to understand what you're getting at. So again, every message should have a purpose. You need to either think, feel, or do. So what are you trying to make them think, feel, or do? Making sure that's at the center of what you're doing, along with that person of lived experience as you're curating a message. Thinking about strong communication. Okay, so here we're on a webinar. Some people are going to view this live. Some people are going to look at the recording. Is this going to be a takeaway for somebody that's looking at the recording? Absolutely, because you can still get some skills, right, that you might not be able to, you might have known, but maybe this is just re-emphasizing some skills that you already have, right? So again, we want to make sure it's accessible to other people. And so thinking about recordings, thinking about slides, thinking about all those things, we want to have all of those components. But this is just us doing a lecture series virtually. But what about if we were to do this in person? Maybe we will want to do an exercise where everybody takes an example of a prompt and then tries to deliver a message that would resonate with an entire audience. But again, everybody learns in different spaces and places. So it's really important to remind ourselves of that as we're thinking about messaging and communications. All right. So we want to also be intentional. We wanted to make sure that every message that we curate for our audience, it resonates with them. Sometimes you're not going to resonate with everybody, right? And so we want to just think about the larger audience that we're trying to capture. And even the people that don't feel moved by what we're communicating, we want to ask them why. Sometimes I love engaging trolls. How many of you all have ever engaged with somebody who was negative online? Maybe they were doing some bullying. Maybe they were just being nasty. Maybe they were being negative. Maybe that's not anybody on here. But sometimes one person engaging with some negative content in a positive way can make a chain reaction happen, right? And so thinking about effective communication is also about debunking things and trying to bring real information and debunking misinformation, right? So again, in this current environment, it's really important that we figure out who are our trusted messengers, and communicating effectively and demystifying some of the things that have curated stigma, just bias, all these things. We as public health practitioners have a duty, an ethical duty, to continue to push rhetoric that is, demystifying misinformation and curating things that have data to back it up and that also resonates with our audiences. Okay? And lastly, but certainly not least, we want to build trust and credibility, right? Because what's the point? If you have no trust, if you have no credibility, no one's going to listen to you. So to gauge and build trust, you have to build rapport. And to build rapport, you have to be out in the community, right? And so bringing people that are closest to a problem or issue or public health crisis is the first step in making real change. So lastly, I wanted to give us a few moments to ask any questions. We have about 4 minutes for questions. So if you all have not seen the Q&A feature, it's at the bottom of your screen, or folks can raise their hands and ask questions, and I will open the floor to you all. Any questions? Jessica Nurick does a great job at debunking the trolls and the misinformation. Yes, love that. Thank you for that comment, Patricia. Any questions? How many of you all knew all this information and just came for a refresher? No, my presentation is 30 minutes, but we have another presenter, Dr. Przybyla, who will be right behind me. You're absolutely welcome. I appreciate you as well. Yes, no worries. Okay, well, if folks don't have questions, that's all right. Oh, here we go. How should we balance debunking misinformation on social media versus ignoring misinformation to prevent the post from getting more attention? Great question, and this was from an anonymous person, so thank you for asking that question. So first and foremost, personally, I think it's really important to debunk misinformation, because misinformation spreads much faster than actual factual information, and a lot of time some of these things are embedded into our society in ways that are really harmful to not only public health, but to science, to medicine, and to really our whole entire population. And so for me, I think it's really important to debunk misinformation, because even though a post is going maybe viral for the negative information it's spreading, sometimes the comments that sometimes like on TikTok or Instagram, you know, people can like comments. And so a lot of times when trolls are engaging on different platforms, sometimes people that address the trolls, those comments will be blown up because people are liking the comment and agreeing with the comment and also replying in a mini thread to that comment or that post. So depending on what platform you're on, that could bring, you know, some information to the fold. Because if you only have all of the people that follow this person that believe everything that they say, and you have somebody coming in and debunking whatever the misinformation is, now you have people that follow that person and their algorithm is pushing their content to other people that maybe don't follow this person or believe in this person. So now you're engaging in different contexts that in a environment where nobody is demystifying the misinformation or addressing the misinformation, it's just going to continue to spread. Does that make sense? So hopefully, for me, that's what I do, is trying to engage sometimes with debunking misinformation. But there are people that are literally paid to go and cause havoc under people's comments, and that's how they've made a living. So no shade, but that, to me, morally and ethically is problematic, but that's not why we're here today, so I won't go too far into that. But again, for me personally, because of my ethical and moral compass, I feel as though, you know, engaging with trolls is sometimes necessary, and especially in this current environment, there's so much misinformation out there that is literally hurting public health and is going to lead to losses of life, to losses of funding, to losses of policy changes. So there's just this downward spiral effect if we don't address the misinformation. So thank you for the question. I appreciate it. And I think we have 15 more seconds. So if there's no more questions, I appreciate you all's attention. And I'm going to stop sharing, and I'm going to turn the virtual stage over to my confidant, my co-conspirator, Dr. Przybyla. Over to you.
Thank you, Marissa, for that introduction. Let me just quick share screen. All right. So what a nice segue to go from one presentation to the next. Thank you for that first half hour of enlightening information. We're going to switch gears a little bit. So I'm going to be talking from a different context. I'm at the University at Buffalo, and I direct the undergraduate public health program here at UB, University at Buffalo. What I'm going to talk a little bit about is a new course that we developed in our undergraduate public health program to give some suggestions for public health professionals who will be soon entering the workforce. I show you this slide to give you a little bit of context. So like Marissa, I like images, I like visuals. And this is a recent photo from our most recent commencement exercise that we did here at the University at Buffalo in our School of Public Health and Health Professions. So the undergraduate public health program is only about 7 or 8 years old. We currently have about 450, 460 students who are majoring in public health. So that's a bachelor's of science in public health. And we have anywhere from 80 to 90 students who are also pursuing a minor in public health. About 40% of our undergraduate students are underrepresented minority. About 75% of them are female, and about 1 in 4 are first generation college students. So I provide that information with just a little bit of context about where we are at the University at Buffalo in terms of history of our undergrad program. Back in 2019, we had the first cohort of graduates of the Bachelor of Science in Public Health degree, and there were 19 of them. I knew them all by face. I recognized, I taught all of them. I had, interactions with all of them. And fast forward to 2022, we had 154 graduates. So our program grew very quickly. Now, COVID was perhaps part of that growth, with a lot of interest and enthusiasm for learning more about public health, at least on the undergraduate side. And right now we average about 130 to 140 BS in public health graduates every single year. I give you this visual for context though. So if you look at the front, kind of bottom half of the slide, that's where all of our graduates are sitting. 1 in every 4 graduates from our School of Public Health and Health Professions is a Bachelor of Science in Public Health student. So for those of you who are at other academic institutions that have an undergraduate public health program, maybe that's not all that different for you. You're seeing a strong growth in your undergraduate training, specifically bachelor's programs in undergraduate public health. I'll also quickly add that we are what our university calls a found major. So even though we might have about 450 graduates in our 450 students in our program, that doesn't mean that they're equally distributed between freshmen, sophomores, juniors, and seniors. So a found major means they probably started at our university in a different major. Maybe it's biology or psychology or sociology or chemistry. They took an intro to public health class and they probably got hooked. They wanted to then pursue that as a degree. And so we have a lot of students who kind of move into our major, usually at the end of their freshman year, oftentimes in their sophomore year, as they discover public health as a major. Everyone working in public health needs to be fully prepared for what the next day will bring to us. Now, sometimes the next day is going to be routine, pretty normal. Today's day is going to look a lot like what tomorrow is going to look like. On the other hand, we know that in a moment's notice, things will shift where tomorrow might be extraordinary. So how can we train our public health students to be nimble, to recognize that on a dime, you might need to shift, you might need to change your focus, your attention based on what the next day brings. For us as educators at UB in our School of Public Health and Health Professions, we were really mindful about how do we equip tomorrow's public health leaders with workforce readiness. Now, career readiness and workforce readiness are really important kind of concepts that we talk a lot about. And for us here at the University of Buffalo, focusing on career development and professional development, particularly for our undergraduate students, was really important when we did our curricular review and our curricular development. We wanted to make sure.
I'm sorry, if I could just cut in, you're not advancing your slides. We're seeing the opening slide. I don't want you to get too far.
You didn't see this slide. Let me start over. Give me 1 sec. Let me stop share. And let me see one more moment. Let me switch it up. Thank you for letting me know, Allison. Are you now seeing my intro slide, the blue one with background?
Oh, we see your presenter view where you can see all the previews.
How about now, Allison?
It's still preview mode, but we can see now we see the students.
Okay, you're not seeing what I'm seeing, but I'm going to roll with it if that's okay.
Yeah.
Just in the interest of time. Okay.
I can share for you, Sarahmona, if you want.
Say that again, Marissa?
I said I can share for you if you want.
Why don't we do that? Why don't we switch? Maybe my screen
I'll switch. I got you.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
No worries.
So while we're making that transition for us at the bachelor's level, we wanted to make sure that our undergraduate students were coming out of college with that essential knowledge and skills as they were entering the public health workforce. So if you can advance to the next slide, that would be great. We also wanted to make sure that the educational requirements that we were providing for our students were reflective accurately of what their current training needs were at the undergraduate level. So we know that undergraduate students and grad students have different needs. For those schools who are accredited by CEF, our Council on Education for Public Health, their competencies and training kind of requirements also look different. We realized pretty quickly that we wanted to develop a new course on public health communication explicitly. And that's what we've done over the last couple of years. That course design and implementation was really kind of an incremental process that took time to develop. And for us, the key to developing this new course was recognizing that public health communication has effective, but also needs to be thinking about innovation. So through that, we recognize that there are some areas of need, kind of some gaps in our curriculum. Yes, students were learning about communication. They were learning about reading and writing and oral communication skills in snippets in different courses, whether that was their writing course that they took through our English department, or whether that was a public health kind of data analysis course where they were practicing some skills about, data analysis and then communicating data. But we realized pretty quickly that being mindful about projecting into the future what our students would need, we recognized that developing a standalone course was important. On a related note, because we graduated our first cohort in 2019, we were able to generate some feedback from our recent alums to give us some thoughts about what they wish they would have learned while in school to help them prepare for their next job right out of college. And so that was also really helpful in terms of our course design and implementation. Through that process, then we realized that we wanted to focus on some oral communication skills as well as written communication skills through that process. I'll quickly say that we have a lot of courses because of the size of our program that are quite large, particularly those introductory courses that students are taking in their first year or in their second year. Even in their third year, though, some of their courses might have 50, 60 students, and it's pretty easy to feel a little bit anonymous in those classes. This course was intentionally designed to be small in size. So we average anywhere from 15 to 20 or so students. That helped with the kind of creating a place and space where students can help to develop those communication skills in a smaller setting. For us, there were kind of three key pieces that we wanted to call into mind when we were thinking about this course design. So Marissa, if you wouldn't mind promoting or going over to the next slide, that would be great. So first, we wanted to think about how can we promote evidence as the basis for public health practice and public health policy. Second, we really wanted our students to understand how to be persuasive in their public health communication and advocating for public health as a discipline. The third really important question that we were struggling with was how do we make sure our students understand the importance of public health communication in an era of misinformation and disinformation? That has taken a whole new light, particularly in the last year or so, where students have also struggled when they see public health leadership and other maybe government officials who might be calling into question some key areas of the kind of the integrity of our discipline. The values that we as public health professionals teach as we're doing our educating, when those don't align with what seems to be happening either at a state or a federal or a world level, that can be really troubling for students as they're kind of navigating this workforce environment. So that comes to this current slide where we talk about the ways with which we help our students develop and or strengthen their communication skills. On the left-hand side of the slide, I want to quickly talk about some three different kind of things that we do in the classroom environment to help our students. First, the sheep scale that you just did with Marissa is a great example of that. I regularly do check-ins with our students just to get a pulse of how they are in the room on a given Tuesday afternoon. There are sometimes things that are going on behind the scenes that it's helpful to give a sense of kind of where students are at. So the sheep scale, I actually borrowed from Marissa and did it a few weeks ago in class to get a sense of where students are at. There might be just some extra stresses that are going on, things that are happening maybe right before midterms when we're approaching the mid-semester point that can be really stressful for students, and that might explain kind of their level of engagement in the classroom that particular day. So doing those regular check-ins I've learned has been really helpful to get a sense of how communicative or not they might be in the day. We also do a series of exercises with one explicit exercise on implicit bias. It really helps students to kind of think about where they are in the moment. And kind of checking their the biases that they might have and their background, their upbringing, their perspectives that might influence the way that they interact with community members or with members of the general public in their future jobs. We do a lot of embedded active listening activities in the class to really understand this importance of whole body listening and whole body communication. So I make clear to students that communication isn't just you talking at people or talking over people, but rather that communication is a two-way street, that you're doing as much listening, sometimes more than you are communicating or actually verbalizing or providing content. The other thing that you see on the right-hand side of the slide are other strategies that we've done in this course to really help students strengthen those communication skills. So first, we do an entire module all about the job search process and thinking about resume writing, cover letter development, how to search for jobs, what are some best practices in interviewing and post-interview behaviors. Students learn all that information, but then we also do a panel discussion with some recent alums of our program. So students actually get to talk to people who are in their shoes, maybe 2 or 3 years ago, to hear more about their experiences entering the public health workforce. So you might be wondering, well, how common is it that students go right out of the bachelor's degree right into entering the workforce? And I would say our graduates probably fall in 3 primary buckets. About 20 20% or so probably enter some additional educational training right after the undergraduate degree. So they might go into an accelerated nursing program. Maybe they're pursuing medical school, maybe social work or law. And those are kind of a small chunk of where our students might go immediately after. That said, the best practices that come from interviewing and kind of navigating workforce development is still a big piece of this, because ultimately they will be looking for a job after that next degree. The second bucket where a lot of our undergraduate students enter is a Master's of Public Health program. Whether they stay here at University of Buffalo or pursue another educational environment, that's something where a lot of students go. But I will say the majority of our undergraduate students finish college and they are ready to go make a difference in the world. They want to go out and find that job, whether it's here locally in Western New York or somewhere else. And so we want to make sure that we're best preparing them for that workforce readiness. The second bullet that you see has to do with the ways with which our students have the opportunity to interact with county, state, and federal health officials. So we have public health professionals who kind of push into our class. We have folks here locally in the Erie County, which is where Buffalo is rooted, to talk about their experiences with public health communication. Specifically, we have a public health communication director for our local county health department who pushes in. She teaches students a whole bunch of information about emergency preparedness. Now, you might be thinking, at least in Buffalo, maybe that's weather related, and it is, right? We might have a blizzard, we might have a severe snowstorm, but she's teaching them about the ways with which the public health department has to interact with public works, public safety, Department of Transportation, and ways in which all those pieces come together when we might have a weather related emergency. There's another recent example from 2 summers ago where there were some wildfires occurring in Canada, right on the border with where New York is, where Buffalo, and there were some concerns about air quality. So this is a great example of a way in which our county health department had to be interacting with and communicating with our Canadian officials about air quality and some concerns. And so it's a great way for our students to interact with kind of the boots on the ground, day-to-day communication that's happening at a county level. Similarly, I have a former student who currently works at the CDC who engages with our students in a class to teach all about CDC health alerts, the differences between a policy memo versus a policy brief, and helping students draft those documents and what those look like, what the process looks like at the federal level. A very insightful experience for our students. Then finally, to really give students a chance to practice some of those communication skills, I've had a whole host of students present at conferences, whether that is kind of a local, kind of university-specific student conference that they can present at in the end of the spring semester, New York State Public Health Association, I've had students kind of present there, or even larger places and spaces like APHA. Again, an opportunity for students, if they choose, to engage in that, actually doing that oral communication through the development of an abstract, and then finally a poster presentation or an oral presentation. A great example for students to help those communication skills. Next slide, please. So we also, particularly in the spring semester, incorporate some communication strategies where our students in the class help with the planning and implementation of our National Public Health Week activities. So this, for those of you who don't know, this is usually in the first full week of April for National Public Health Week. Our students are on the planning committee for this event that we do at the school level. It's a great way for our students to have a voice at the table. So something that Marissa had alluded to that I wanted to pick up on was sometimes undergraduate students or just students generally might feel that they don't really have a voice at the table. They might feel junior to others around them, either based on their title or their age, and they might not feel like they're in a place that their opinion is matters or their opinion is necessarily valued. By having our students in this course be on the planning committee for National Public Health Week, it's a great way for our students to say, hey, our opinions about how we want to plan and implement activities for this week matter. You might want to consider offering, events at this time of the day or this day of the week to make sure we can get student involvement. The pictures that you see here are nice illustrations of that. So for parts of our National Public Health Week planning with this particular undergraduate course, our students have done things like planning a community blood drive. So that's the image that you see on the bottom left there. We've done some other events where they kind of decide that they want to do a film screening and a discussion. We're going to be doing a donation drive this April for our, it's kind of a local health office that's affiliated with a town's high school, where we're going to be collecting some laundry and personal hygiene products for our students in this particular high school. And then students will be doing the delivery of those items that we collect. We do a whole other host of things that students want. including a hiring summit. We do a snack and chat event with public health careers, specifically in government workforce jobs. Students are going to have planned Narcan trainings. And in fact, our Delta Omega chapter is going to be co-sponsoring a chew and chat with public health professionals. So again, a nice way for our students to have these opportunities to find their voice at the table with their public health communication that they're learning in this class. Next slide. So I would say as an educator, one of the things that's really important to me is, like Marissa's point, I'm a lifelong learner, but I also want to make sure that we're nimble, effective, and innovative in our course design and implementation, rather than say, we've done this course, we designed it, good to go, we're just going to keep delivering it in the same old approach. We're really mindful about feedback that we receive from our students. The first big piece that I've learned, at least with undergraduate students, as they're exploring the ways with which they're going to be future public health communicators, is creating community. We spend a lot of time earlier in the semester to really create a brave space, but also a safe space for our students to engage effectively with each other. I absolutely have students who are very vocal, outspoken, pretty opinionated, don't have much difficulty communicating in small group settings, and they are comfortable sharing. On the other hand, I definitely have had students who are more introverted by nature. They are less likely to share. They are more quiet in nature. Helping to develop that brave and safe space that we create that community is a really important element as we kind of begin the semester. The second piece that I've learned, and this is for me, but also for my teaching assistant and for students, fostering patience and humility. That goes a long way. It takes a long time, but that's something that we've learned through this process of this course, particularly working with undergraduate students, that patience and humility is certainly important. And then finally, I would say celebrating successes, right? So yes, students are in this course and it's for credit and they're looking for a certain grade, but I also recognize that there's places and spaces where we can celebrate successes that are beyond the grade book or beyond academic exercises and assignments. So when students who are more on the quieter side really take a lead in helping to promote and then deliver some type of event that we're doing for National Public Health Week, it is fabulous for them to see them really blossom and grow. We also have developed a program here at UB and our School of Public Health and Health Professions called the Kudos Program. So it's a place for faculty or staff to also nominate students who kind of come out of their shell, who have done really well in kind of creating and growing personally and professionally. And it's another great way for us to be able to celebrate those successes. So I would say in a complex information environment that we're in, it's really important as we're training public health students to think about how to effectively and accurately convey public health information in the whole host of the communication channels that are out there. Being mindful about who you're communicating with, what channels they're using, who they trust, how to be credible, how to be accurate. Those are really important skills that are important for students to kind of practice in that kind of academic setting as they enter the public health workforce in the future. Next slide. I am open to any questions that anyone has about the course, and then I think we've got some time to be able to open up more broadly for both Marissa and myself. Thank you, everyone. Any questions? And Marissa, you might, if you feel free to stop share if you like. I think I'm good on my. Thank you. Seeing in the chat, I don't notice any questions. Anybody questions?
I have a question.
Go ahead, Marissa.
So, as the folks that may join and see this afterwards, what are some strategies that folks can use, maybe today, that they can learn how to effectively communicate, maybe to a professor, maybe to somebody who they don't, maybe somebody, let's say for somebody that they disagree with, whether it's a professor, a supervisor, someone like that, on a grade or an assignment or maybe a work task. How can they navigate that as a public health practitioner?
Yeah, so the second to last slide I had talked about patience and humility, but also a little bit of just stepping back. I think sometimes we live in an era where we feel like we need to respond immediately, and sometimes our emotions get the best of us in those moments, right? And then we might resent or regret some of the ways with which we've communicated. So we in this class talk a lot about some of the immediate public health response that happened locally by our state officials and federally during COVID, right? And sometimes answering a question quickly is not necessarily accuracy. So how do you balance the difference between speed versus accuracy? That can translate into day-to-day actions, right? The way that we interact with our supervisor, maybe with a professor, maybe with our teaching assistant, a colleague, or even a classmate, right? How do we kind of balance that? And I would say, pause, take a moment. Before you hit send, think, how would I feel if I were on the receiving end? Is the tone that I'm using what I'm trying to convey? Could this be misinterpreted in a way that I didn't mean, which can escalate to cause some problems? So I think that's a really important balance when we're thinking about training future public health professionals. Speed isn't always the right answer. Maybe we need to find the way with which we can kind of level the balance of accuracy and speed. And that takes time and practice. I also acknowledge a lot with them that I'm imperfect. I make mistakes every day, but I love making mistakes because it gives me a chance to learn from them. And that's an important, I think, lesson that we all can take regardless of where we are in our career.
Thank you.
Okay, so there's a question here. How can you please share what you are telling students who are looking at the current environment and wonder if it's worth it to go into public health? Oh man, that's like a day-to-day conversation that I have with students, whether those are undergrads or graduate students. So some of the things that I talk about earlier on in the semester is at least in New York State, we have really great, robust data, and nationally as well, about where our public health county workforce looks, what it looks like currently, what % are planning to retire in the near future, particularly in the next year or two, and how many of them actually have public health training or not. I often use that as a place to say those places are going to look pretty different when individuals choose to retire, and how are we going to fill that gap with training, right? And the ways with which those of you who are interested in doing public health training to prepare you for an environment in a government job, they're there, right? The second place I would say is it's not only government public health, there's lots of other places and spaces. So one of the earlier comments Marissa made was that public health is everywhere. It's all around us every day. And there are lots of ways with which we talk to students about, while you might not have a title that says public health educator or public health specialist, you are doing public health, whether you're working for a for-profit or an academic medical center, or you might be working for Amazon doing workplace safety, right? So I think there's lots of places where we can expand the way that maybe undergraduates or even their families might think about what a public health job looks like. But I would say we've got to continue to replace and prepare the next generation to replace the generation that will be moving out of the public health workforce. So put your boots on, come with a smile, and be prepared for what the next day might bring.
I'd love to also add to that because, again, I think a lot of people that got acceptance letters between last year and this year, it's looking a little bit different in terms of the public health workforce. And then also with the professional degree kind of conversation and designation, there's a lot of trepidation around all of it. And so one thing that I have told a lot of my mentees, a lot of my students, is that now is the time to diversify your skill set as well as your streams of income. If we've learned anything from 2025 and 2026 so far, it's that you cannot rely potentially on one stream of income because it could be snatched, it could be defunded, it could not exist the following year. So again, thinking about skills that we can transfer to other realms of workforce, that is being an effective communicator. You can use that in any job. Being able to take really complex data and synthesize it to make it digestible for a general audience, that is a skill set that you can use at any job. Being a really great team worker, being somebody who can build teams and that can work well with others that maybe are combative, that maybe don't work well with other people. If you can be a glue, you are going to be an asset to any team that you join. So thinking about the tech world, thinking about medical devices, thinking about hospitals, thinking about all of these different realms, it's not all quote unquote public health, right? But it is. So even if it's business, even if it's law and policy, even if it's education, there are ways that you can integrate public health into each and everything that you do. And maybe you don't have public health analyst, like Sarahmona said, as your job title. But I think we need to get away from just attaching public health to the job title and feeling like it's the only realm that we can exist as public health practitioners, and start to really think more broadly about the skill sets that we're trying to learn, and think about what are those transferable skills that can carry us forward through any job that we have. Because as many of us have known and have seen, that because of there's lack of funding, because there's different administration priorities, ebbs and flows are going to happen. And that is going to be, throughout your life. So it just happens that right now, public health is not maybe a pillar right now, but that could be different in 5 years. That could be different in 10 years. So one thing that you need to do is stay ready so you don't have to get ready. So what does that look like? Going on Coursera, looking at free courses, going on LinkedIn, doing some LinkedIn learning, using your school or whatever affiliations you have to see what free resources are available right now. What are some trainings that you can take? Are you thinking about studying for the CHES, the PMP exam, the CPH exam? If you're a Delta Omega member, what are some resources that you can use? You're using a resource right now, the professional webinars. This is something that is free to you that you can utilize as a resource. So again, start to use your network, use your resources that you have, because again, this is an opportunity for you to grow and look inward and think about, okay, what is my plan if I were to lose my job tomorrow? Because some people have not had the fortitude to think about that proactively and have to think about it reactively. So to put yourself in a better circumstance, let's think proactively instead of reactively.
Great
Great
advice.
Yeah.
Yes. All right, so we're at time, so I'm going to go ahead and say a huge thank you to both our presenters today. This was absolutely fantastic. So I appreciate everybody attending, your questions. Thanks again to the presenters. And I hope you all will join us for our next presentation, which is on March 26th, on a very important topic these days, advocacy in public health. So please join us then. All right, everybody, thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.